because we need to get this going.
Oh, I've been going. I said hi twice and then...
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. All right, do our intro.
Hi.
Hi.
And welcome.
Do you say that to me? Or are you saying it to the people?
Know. I think it's funnier if you don't know.
You make eye contact with me, and then you just keep talking like I'm not here.
Welcome to I'll Drink to Fact, a true story versus Hollywood podcast, where we take a look at true story movies based on true stories, and we compare them to the true stories that they're supposedly based on. And then we compare those stories to the movies and find out which movies are full of fact or full of crap.
Good job.
Thanks. I got through it eventually.
You did. I know you would.
So, Helter Skelter. It's finally fucking here.
I know.
Finally. We finally watched the shit.
We did the research.
Drill. This is not a drill. This is the real son of a bitch. Sorry. Was that too much?
It was a little intense.
A little? I'm sorry. I feel intense. This movie is intense.
It is.
Like, whether it's the overacting or the crazy story.
Right.
It is intense.
Just like camping.
And why did you get a weird look on your face once it overacting? Did you not watch the guy that played Manson the entire time?
Okay, I thought he did a really good job. And I've been holding on to this fun fact piece of trivia that I've been wanting to share with you. Fun fact, the guy who played Charles Manson, Stephen Railsback, he locked himself in a closet for 2 hours every day in order to prepare for this role. So yeah, the guy was crazy. Like,
yeah, and like we talked about, he went on to play Ed Gein also. Yeah. So yeah, this dude, yeah.
So
probably certifiable.
Well, but I mean, maybe accurate.
Maybe, yeah. Well, before we get into it, I'm curious, what's in your cup?
Ooh, I'd love to tell you about what's in my cup. So I'm trying out something new. It was a Christmas gift from my mom and Ken. Thank you, Mom and Ken. It is a bottled cocktail, but it's not a cocktail mix. It is legit a cocktail. You don't have to add alcohol to it. The brand is Soul Boxer, and I'm drinking their brandy old fashioned right now because brandy is what you use in Wisconsin to make old fashions. And it's 62 proof. And usually, even with these like pre-mixed bottled cocktails, I usually add more alcohol to it.
This one you don't have to.
No, not with this one. I was pleasantly surprised because I got it and I was like, oh, thanks. I'll probably still add some brandy to it. But no, it's good and it's strong. So I'm just drinking it as is over ice.
Nice.
That's what's in my cup. What's in your cup?
So what's in my cup, I am calling Bugliosi's Punch. Vincent Bugliosi was the prosecutor of the Manson family. Mm-hmm. And I call this Bugliosi's Punch. It's got pineapple juice, peach vodka. Katie made some blood orange simple syrup today, so it's got some of that in there. Club soda, and then a cherry garnish, which I called it a punch. And then I was kind of looking up the word punch for a drink.
Okay.
Because if you look up the definition for a punch, it literally just says like the hitting version of a punch. So you have to look up punch drink. And did you know that the word punch is a loan word from Sanskrit? The word panka, meaning 5, because the original recipe for a punch had 5 ingredients. I didn't know that before I made this 5-ingredient punch.
Either. That is so cool.
Yeah, so it was alcohol, sugar, lemon, water, and tea or spices.
Was the original punch.
Yep. And then while I was on this page looking at punches, there is a rum punch.
Oh, I love rum punches.
And the simple recipe was enshrined in a national rhyme that goes 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak.
I've heard of that, yes.
Yeah. So a traditional rum punch is 1 part lime juice, 2 parts sweetener, 3 parts rum, and 4 parts water.
Water?
That's the weak.
I know, but yeah.
So,
anyway, cool.
Anyway, yeah. This isn't about punch this week, but I just came across that and I was like, oh, holy shit. I made a 5-part drink that I called a punch and son of a bitch.
Well, yeah, that is a fun fact. I never knew that before.
Me either. So, Helter Skelter.
Yes.
It took us 3 weeks.
And that's not just saying that we're going to watch it. That was 3 weeks of us actually watching it.
Right. That wasn't the 17 months. 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, whatever it is, of us saying we were actually going to watch it when we didn't. Tell me about it.
Okay. Yeah, I did the movie this week. You did the true story. So we are talking about the 1976 made-for-TV movie that originally aired on April 1st and 2nd on CBS. The original airing time in total was 194 minutes. And on the DVD release, it was 184 minutes. So the version that we watched on Amazon Prime, it's not streaming for free, but Amazon does have the 194 original airing version, which is what we watched. As I said, it's starring Stephen Railsback as Charles Manson. And originally, here's another fun fact regarding the lead role, but originally it was offered to Martin Scorsese to play Charles Manson.
Interesting.
Right? If you look up pictures of Martin Scorsese from this time, I could see him pulling it off. No, but I thought Steve Railsback did a good job. But at the same time, Martin Scorsese was working on a little project called Taxi Driver, so needless to say, he had other priorities.
It's like a small indie movie, right?
Yeah.
Never amounted to anything?
The movie was based on the 1974 book by Vincent Bugliosi, who you mentioned, prosecutor against Charles Manson and members of the Manson family.
Awesome.
Also, that was interesting. The film was not shown in LA in fear that it would stir up bad memories, especially since it had only been about 7 years since the murders happened. So
that's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Especially since it had ties to the film world with Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski and stuff. So
yeah, definitely. So as you alluded to, this movie is based on the Tate and LaBianca murders committed by members of the cult known as the Manson family, led by Charles Manson. The movie also covers the investigation and the trial. So the movie opens with George DiCenzo, who is the actor who plays Vincent Bugliosi. He says the following. Good evening. You are about to see a dramatization of the actual facts You are about to see a dramatization of actual facts in which some of the names have been changed, but the story is true. If it were not true, it would not be believable, for it is surely one of the most bizarre chapters in the history of crime. We may not like to accept the fact that people such as some of those in the story of Helter Skelter exist in our life, and yet they do. And while they do, we cannot say that the story of Helter Skelter is ended. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
So the movie wastes no time getting into it. It starts on the early morning of August 9th, 1969, with people in the foothills of Beverly Hills hearing screams nearby. And again, the character Vincent Bugliosi is narrating over the scenes of various people hearing screams that night. And he uses a phrase that I want to start using in my daily life, which is, it was so quiet you could almost hear the sound of ice rattling in cocktail shakers.
Nice.
In the next scene, we see a housekeeper arriving in the morning to clean the house, and she discovers bodies instead. And then when the police arrive, this was like one of my favorite parts of the movie, but one officer noticed that there's a bloody smear on the button outside of the compound that closes the gate. And he's like, hey, look at this blood. And then touches it and gets his fingerprints all over it. I'm like, worst crime scene detective ever.
If the movie is true, then there was some horrible police work involved in this.
Right. I think it's a strong commentary on on some of the things they overlooked and didn't do correctly that they should have done.
Oh my God.
Because that's kind of a running theme in the movie.
Yeah. You would honestly, it kind of feels like the police in this are part of a Three Stooges bit or something at times.
So after the police arrive, we tour the crime scene following around Mr. Rosner, who is Roman Polanski's business manager, as he tries to help the detectives identify the bodies at the crime scene. So there are 5 bodies at the scene. The first body they come to is that of a young man in a car in the driveway, but Rosner doesn't recognize him. Rosner is able to identify the second body, which is found on the front lawn, as Wojtek Frykowski, who is a friend of Roman Polanski's from Poland.
Okay.
The third belongs to Abigail Folger, heiress of Folger Coffee. Her body was...
Best part of waking up.
Oh. Yep. Her body was found outside on the grass as well, about 10 yards away from Frykowski's body. And Rosner said that Folger and Frykowski were staying with Tate while Polanski was away in Europe. I believe they were married.
I know she was pregnant with his kid.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, they were together. In case people didn't know that, I was just going to put that.
Okay, thanks.
So after finding those 3 people outside of the house, we work our way inside, and as we pass through the front door, we see that the word pig is written in blood on the door. The first body that Rosner identifies in the house is that of Jay Sebring. And finally, Rosner comes to the body of Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant at the time. So people in LA are really shaken up by this murder, and we see this effect on a couple, Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, who are returning home from a weekend away the day after the murders happened. So Rosemary LaBianca expresses concern because the last time they were away, someone had broken into their house. And that's just kind of like all we kind of see of them for now. More on them later. Back when we were walking through the scene of the crime, we did see police arrest William Garrettson and bring him in for questioning. So Garrettson was the caretaker of the house and had been living at the guest house on the Tate property. During his questioning, we learned that he knew the boy whose body was found in the car at the Tate house in the driveway. His name was Steve Parent, and he was coming to visit Garrettson when he was killed. Garrettson was cleared on August 12, 1969 for lack of evidence against him. 2 investigators working another homicide case called the Hinman case come to talk to the investigator who's working on the Tate case. So in the Hinman case, we get a little bit of information about it at this point. So Gary Hinman was a music teacher. He was killed, and the attack wounds were similar to what was found at the Tate murders, the attack wounds and how vicious it was. Also, at the Hinman murder, there was political piggy was written in blood at the crime scene. So the Tate house had pig written in blood. So Bobby Beausoleil was picked up for the murder on the Hinman case and was in custody at the time of the Tate murders. We also learned that Bobby Beausoleil was also living out on Spawn Ranch as a member of the Manson family. So the investigators on the Hinman case were thinking that Bobby Beausoleil wasn't working alone, but the investigator on the Tate case said, well, Beausoleil was in custody at the time, so it doesn't really matter. But then the other investigators were like, well, he lived on Spawn Ranch, so he could have had other people from the Manson family working with him. Gotcha.
Okay. And sorry to interrupt. Did the Hinman murders happen before the Tate murders?
Yes, they did.
Okay, cool.
So the movie opens up with the Tate murders, and the Hinman case is referred to throughout the movie, but we really don't get a lot of information on it.
Okay.
I think I'll kind of mention it again a little bit later, but that was one thing I wish would have also been covered a little bit in this movie, because that was a murder case that involved the Manson family. So, yeah, I just thought it could have also been covered a little bit more. But
okay.
So the investigator kind of brushed it off, that there would be a connection there, because he thought that the only motivation behind the Tate murders was drugs, because I guess they found a bag of dope at the murder scene. So they were like, so he's like, oh, it must have been motivated by drugs.
Gotcha. Okay.
So on the night of Sunday, August 10th, 1969, the bodies of Rosemary and Lino LaBianca are found at their home by their children. Helter Skelter, misspelled, was written in blood on the refrigerator. We learned that it was figured out that a very unique gun was used at the Tate house based on pieces of the grip that were found at the crime scene. It was a high standard .22 caliber Longhorn Revival, a blunt line special. I don't know what any of that means, but that's what it was. On August 16, 1969, the police raid Spawn's movie ranch in response to multiple complaints of an auto theft ring, so totally unrelated to the Tate and LaBianca murders. There, they pick up Charles Manson and various members of the Manson family.
And what date was that?
August 16, 1969.
Okay.
So they picked up Danny DiCarlo, who would eventually become an informant for the prosecutors. Susan Denise Atkins, who was 21, a.k.a. Sadie Mae Glutz, and her infant son, I'm going to try to say this correctly, Zezozose Zadfrack Glutz.
Okay, yeah.
They also picked up Sace, who was 22, a.k.a. Moses, a.k.a. Boots, Steve Grogan, 17, a.k.a. Clem, who had escaped from a state mental hospital, Patricia Krenwinkel, who was 22. She was also known as Kate, also known as Marnie Reeves, also known as Big Patty, and also known as Mary Ann Scott. On September 1st, 1969, 9-year-old Stephen Quint found a revolver in his yard near the road embankment. And I thought it was interesting, you and I both noticed this, but when the kid picked up the gun, he picked it up by the barrel, and we're like, that's weird. Why? That's like the worst way to pick it up. But he was actually doing it so he wouldn't mess up the fingerprints on the gun handle.
Right, he had seen it on TV.
Yeah, which was probably the best like detective work in the whole movie. This 9-year-old kid.
Then when they hand it over to the cop,
he just grabbed it.
The cop grabs it by the grip, erasing all fingerprints and,
Yep. So yeah, the father called the LAPD and turned it over to them. And they tagged and filed the gun into the property room of the Van Nuys division of the LAPD. Sometime later, Charles Manson and the Manson family were released by the DA due to insufficient evidence against them. On October 12th, 1969, Stephanie Mark, who was 17, and Kitty Lassiter, who was 17 and 5 months pregnant with Bobby Beausoleil's baby, hailed down 2 police officers in Death Valley claiming that Charles Manson was trying to kill them. They revealed that the Manson family had left Spawn Ranch and now they're living in Barker Ranch in Death Valley. But what the girls didn't know is that Charles Manson was arrested and jailed in Independence, California for setting fire to an earth-moving vehicle. The girls revealed that Bobby Beausoleil didn't act alone in the murder of Gary Hinman, and that Sadie Mae Lutz, a.k.a. Susan Atkins, was with him. So Susan Atkins was brought in for questioning for the Hinman murder and basically told the cops, like, everything. It almost seemed like she was kind of, like, bragging about it, and she was just very, like, straightforward, like, this is what happened, this is what I did. But she refused to let them record her testimony, but she was arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. On November 25th, 1969, Leslie Van Houten was brought in for questioning, and she reveals that 3 women and 1 man went to the Tate house on the night of August 8th. She said that one of the girls who went was named Linda, but she didn't kill anyone. It was also revealed that Tex, whose real name was Charles Watson, and Katie, whose real name was Patricia Krenwinkel, also went along that night. And based on this, the LAPD was able to issue warrants for Charles Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian.
Awesome.
We find out that Watson was in his hometown in Texas, and it turns out the sheriff of that town was also his cousin, so Bugliosi was worried about extradition issues. Like, they were worried about being able to get him back into California.
Yeah, they were worried about that good old boy police down there.
Yeah. But we find out that Watson was arrested on a drug charge in Van Nuys, California in April, so they have his fingerprints on file. And they're able to match his fingerprints to ones picked up from the Tate house.
Nice.
So they're able to place him at the crime scene.
Hey, some good police work.
Yeah, exactly. On December 2nd, upon hearing that a warrant is out for her arrest, Linda Kasabian voluntarily surrenders to police in Concord, New Hampshire. The LAPD is still having trouble getting Watson out of Texas at this time. So state prosecutors make a deal with Susan Atkins' lawyer that if she cooperates and testifies truthfully before a grand jury in the Hinman Tate LaBianca murders, she will not be charged the death penalty in those cases, and her grand jury testimony cannot be used against her or any of her co-defendants when brought to trial. So she basically really got a good deal, and even though they couldn't use any of her testimony at trial, what they could do was use it to get indictments against people.
Right. Plus, they also, in my opinion, it showed them what evidence they need to look for. So it gave them a way to reverse engineer their case, if have you.
Yeah, at least gave them a direction to work with.
Yeah, as
definitely.
opposed to just guessing
Trying to
in
guess,
the dark.
yeah. So the LA County Grand Jury was able to issue the following indictments. Leslie Van Houten, who was in custody in LA, she was indicted 2 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Susan Atkins with 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Charles Tex Watson, who was in custody in McKinney, Texas, was indicted 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Patricia Katie Krenwinkel, who was in custody in Mobile, Alabama, was indicted of 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Linda Kasabian, 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. And Charles Manson, in custody in Independence, California, 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder.
Nice.
So on December 14th, 1969, Susan Atkins actually had her testimony printed in the LA Times. Her lawyer claims that they had agreed that the story could only be released in the European media or European newspapers, but it somehow got leaked to, like, the LA media.
Right, I'm sure after that, because at this point they haven't even done jury selection yet, and I'm sure that definitely made it hard to find a juror who was not familiar with the case.
Exactly. So then the following day, on December 15th, 1969, ABC News basically takes her testimony from the newspaper, and because she was so detailed, they were able to follow her testimony and find the location where they had dumped their bloody clothes after the Tate murders. And in the movie, they said, like, to this day, this is still an embarrassment to the LAPD. Like, the fact that the news crew was able to find huge evidence in the case.
I love the scene in the movie too, because like these guys are like, okay, so this is where this happened, like, and in the direction she was like, we got in there and then we changed clothes in the car, and then we like came to this place where the car could pull over and we threw it over. And so these four guys get in this car and they literally change clothes, and then they find a spot and they're just, it was just kind of, it was funny, you know, they didn't just like guesstimate how long it took. They literally changed clothes.
Well, yeah, it's just kind of, I thought it was really clever.
It's more clever than the police were able to do with it, I guess. So
yeah, I feel like I've seen that in an episode of like CSI or something, like where they just follow the killer's footsteps and boom, there it is. So on December 24th, 1969, Judge William Keene, unable to convince Manson otherwise, allows him to represent himself in his trial. Bugliosi, still unable to piece together a strong case against Manson, thinks he has a plan in order to buy himself some more time. So he needs more time to try to build this case. Since Manson has a right to go to trial 60 days after his indictment, Bugliosi thinks he can scare Manson into stalling if he thinks the prosecution is in a hurry to go to trial.
Gotcha.
So on January 28th, 1970, Bugliosi sees his plan come to fruition as Manson asks for more time, and a continuance is granted until February 9th, 1970. So he's able to buy himself a couple more days. Around this time, they hear news that the Texas Secretary of State has signed the extradition order to send Tex Watson from McKinney back to Los Angeles.
Cool.
So 5 months after the Tate and LaBianca murders, Linda Kasabian is arraigned on 7 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Keene accepts her plea of not guilty. At the same time, however, Judge Anthony Milo in Texas vacates the extradition order and grants a 30-day continuance. So Tex, can't come to LA.
Good old boys.
Yep. A few days later, Krenwinkel gave up the fight against extradition, so she was moved from Alabama back to Los Angeles. So then Bugliosi finds out that Susan Atkins announces that she's going to deny everything she said in her grand jury testimony. So the prosecution decides to offer Linda Kasabian an immunity deal. On February 26, 1970, Linda agrees to testify truthfully against all defendants if, after this testimony, the LA District Attorney's Office agrees to petition the Superior Court to grant her immunity from prosecution. So on April 13th, 1970, Judge William Keene disqualifies himself from the trial after Manson files an affidavit of prejudice against him. The case was handed over to Judge Charles H. Older.
The first judge was just like, hell yes, get me the fuck out of here. He's like, I ain't gonna argue with that shit.
Mm-hmm. And in the movie that was after Charles Manson, like, leapt at the judge's stand.
Oh, right.
Like a crazy person.
But he had also, before he resigned his spot as the judge, said that Manson wasn't able to defend himself.
Well, he tried to convince him not to defend himself.
Right.
And he let him defend himself. But after this new judge came on, I think he forced Manson to pick a lawyer. So the lawyer he picked was this guy named Scoville, and Bugliosi was protesting it because Scoville had a history of like long, drawn-out trials and like making them overly complicated.
Gotcha.
And as predicted, throughout the course of the trial, Scoville objected to as much as he could, even if it was loosely grounded. He objected to Bugliosi's opening statement, saying that he was giving the defense's opening statement for them. He even objected as soon as Linda Kasabian like raised her hand to be sworn in. She like raised his hand and he was like, oh, objection. He said that she was unable to act as a witness because she was mentally unstable on the grounds that she had taken LSD at least 300 times. And sometimes I think he was just doing it to like put like doubt in the jury's mind, or like put these little seedlings of thought in their mind.
Right.
Because then the judge would say like, overruled. But I mean, now it's out there and they're like, well, is she mentally unstable? That would make sense if you've taken LSD 300 times.
Right, in that sense. And sometimes it almost felt like a coach trying to like ice a kicker or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, he's just trying to like, slow down the momentum or something like that.
Or even just confuse the jury.
Because there was that one time in the movie where he was like, objection, and they're like waiting for him to say like on what grounds, and he's like, just a second. Like you couldn't
right.
figure out what the fuck he was objecting to. Mm-hmm. Just he wanted to make sure he got it in there.
Yep. And so they said something like they had to go up to so he would like object, and then the judge would call them up to his stand, and it was something like 20 minutes of discussion alone at the judge's bench before Kasabian could even start her testimony. It was crazy.
It's nuts.
Mm-hmm. So after Kasabian gave her full testimony of what happened on the night of the Tate and LaBianca murders, the prosecution rested. And I mean, if I remember, does that mean that she was the only witness that they called, the prosecution?
But they didn't rest for good, I don't think.
I mean, they didn't call any more witnesses.
Okay, see, I thought that was just for that day.
Because the judge was like, okay, call your next witness, and Bugliosi's like, the prosecution rests.
Okay, then yeah.
And then he went over to the defense, and he was like, okay, are you ready to present your defense or whatever? And they were like, yes, Your Honor. He was like, all right, call your first witness. And they were like, the defense rests. Like, we're not calling any witnesses.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, you're right.
So what my question is, was Kasabian the only one that they had? Because I don't think at least they didn't show anyone go before her.
Maybe she's the only one that they felt they needed.
Well, and so it's like, I think she might have been the only witness called in the Manson case. Which is interesting.
She was involved in all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
She was involved in all of it, but she never actually killed anyone. So, which is part of the reason why the prosecution felt comfortable giving her the immunity deal. So after the defense said that they didn't want to call up any witnesses, this caused the 3 female defendants, so Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel, to stand up and scream that they wanted to testify. Well, the lawyers didn't want their clients to testify because the 3 women were planning on taking sole responsibility for the murder so Charlie could walk away free.
Right.
And the judge finally ruled that it is the right of the defendants to testify if they want to, and that would supersede any decision made by their lawyers. So the judge is like, nope, they get to testify if they want to. But before the 3 women could take the stand, Charles Manson asked if he could make a statement. The judge agreed under the stipulation that the jury not be present when he makes a statement. So they took the whole jury out. And during this statement, Manson talks about how he never went to school and he, quote, stayed stupid while he watched the rest of the world grow up around him. He talks about how the people in his family, like the Manson family, were people that were also left behind by society, so he took them in and took care of them. He also had this quote, which I thought was interesting. He said, "My father is a jailhouse. My father is your system. I am a reflection of you. I am what you made me. I ate out of your garbage cans to stay out of jail. I've worn your secondhand clothes. I've tried my best to get along in your world, and now you say you want to kill me. Well, I'm already dead. I have been my whole life." So that was just an interesting quote to me about how he felt like left behind by society. So throughout the movie, obviously, the movie's called Helter Skelter, which is, of course, in reference to
a Beatles song from the White Album. Yeah.
Yep. But to Charles Manson, Helter Skelter meant a race war, basically, where basically the tides would be flipped and the karma would turn around and it would be an all-out race war, and basically the whole white race would be wiped out, except for Charles Manson and his family, and it would be like him and the black people, and this is like from one of the Manson family members, like questionings, but he said that Charlie believed that like the black people would then come to him and ask him how to like run the world, and he would basically enslave the black race again. So like it was just like this whole topsy-turvy like Helter Skelter thing. So anyway, so Charles Manson really felt like he was getting messages from the Beatles in their music. Other songs that spoke to him included Political. I think, wasn't there a song called Political Piggies?
There's a song called Piggies.
Piggies, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And obviously the song Revolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then there's this other thing where this guy who used to be in the Manson family, he was talking about how in the Bible it refers to, he also went through the Bible and talked about how he thought various passages in the Bible referred to the Beatles.
Yeah, from Revelations. like I think chapters 9 and 10 or something like that.
Okay. But then there's also this part about an angel of the bottomless pit called Exterminans, and Charlie believed he was Exterminans, or that angel of the bottomless pit. And because he was the angel of the bottomless pit and like his family was in the bottomless pit, that's why they would survive that race war. So just very interesting things. So that's where the title Helter Skelter comes from. But during that statement, he had this quote where he says, I didn't write the music, I just listened to its message. So I'm assuming he was talking about like the Beatles music. And then I just kind of had this thought, which I thought was like interesting, how he talked about how he was like influenced by like this quote violent music by the Beatles. Not even violent, but it just made me think about how sometimes like the attitude today towards violence in music, movies, or like video games, and people think it like has a negative effect on people's behaviors. I was like, I wonder if that had anything to do with Charles Manson, because he openly like talked about how the Beatles music influenced him and the things he did, i.e. like caused these murders. And then like our parents grew up knowing about Charles Manson type of a thing and like had that association. So then I wonder if they're like, oh, so music can have these subliminal messages that makes people do things. And anyway, you can edit it out. That's stupid, but
no, I don't think it's stupid at all. I mean, it's definitely it makes me laugh because Helter Skelter was definitely like a metal song before metal was a thing. And metal music like is constantly one of the like ones that is, I won't say picked on, but drawn
definitely
out, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's all interpretation. I mean, you know, if we want to go there, like religion has been a reason behind war for as long as there's been humankind. So, you know, people always find a way to point a finger at something.
Right.
So,
I don't
know. But that's a very good point. I never thought about with, you know, Manson and the music and everything. Mm-hmm. You know, when I think of violence in music, I guess my generation, the first thing that comes to mind is like Columbine.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of weird to think back like 30 years before that there was Manson, who was talking a lot about music and violence from it.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, sorry, just a little side tangent.
No, I appreciate it. That's cool.
So after his statement, he kind of like went on about how he felt left behind and things like that, and kind of like, I'm a reflection of what you made me, so how can you blame me for being what I am when you made me what I am, type of a thing.
Right.
So then he walked over to the 3 female defendants and said, you don't have to testify. And that was kind of the end of that. Also, one of the defense attorneys went missing.
What was his name?
Milik,
okay,
I believe.
So his name was actually changed for the movie.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll tell you a little bit more about his story in a minute.
Yeah. He went on a camping trip and never came back.
Right. They said they found him in the movie. They said they found him bloodied with his head
in a pool of water with his head wedged under a rock.
Right.
Was the approximate quote there.
Which is close, but a little far off.
Okay. Yeah, it was very interesting because they like the way they first introduced it, because he went on this camping trip and then they couldn't find him. And so then Bugliosi's wife was like, well, do you think he did that on purpose to kind of like delay the trial? And Bugliosi was like, no, he would never do that. Like, he's not that type of man. And I mean, then the next day they showed like the trial continued, even though he wasn't there. And then later we find out, yeah. So like I said, the trial continued. There was an outburst by the defendants. So they were forbidden by the judge to return to the court for the rest of the guilt trial. So eventually, Charles Manson and the 3 defendants were all found guilty of all of their charges, and all defendants were sentenced to the death penalty. On February 18th, 1972, the California State Supreme Court voted to abolish the death penalty, so the defendants were automatically given life sentences. Manson and the other defendants become eligible for parole in 1978, and that's kind of how the movie ends. Well, no. The movie ended with like this sort of monologue by Bugliosi's character talking about, you know, is this the end of Charles Manson and people like him, or are there more people like him? Kind of like, I think the way he worded it was like spawning from this story.
Right, right. People who are being inspired by the story and...
Right. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that they like ended the movie on like asking, you know, how many more of them are among us, and not necessarily asking like, what should we be doing differently as a society so we don't have to do this again? Because a lot of like what Manson was saying in his statement was like, I felt left behind by society. I felt left behind by your system. Like, it wasn't so much like a reflection upon ourselves. It was like, well, there's going to be more. Like, what can we do about it?
Right, it was almost a call to vigilance instead of a call to, like,
action?
Change,
yeah.
action. Yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting. So that was the end of the movie, I guess.
Yeah. Is that all you got?
No. I wanted to talk about one thing I thought was interesting. For some reason, I thought there were going to be like a bunch of movies about Charles Manson and the Manson family. And so I was going to list off all the other movies inspired by this story, but there really aren't a whole lot, especially not like mainstream Hollywood movies.
Okay.
So the movies that I got on my list are Helter Skelter 2004, which was another made-for-TV movie, right?
Yeah, which was actually based off of the same book that Vincent Bugliosi wrote. My understanding of that movie is it's not a remake of this one. What it does is it follows Linda Kasabian's time as the main witness. So it doesn't attack the whole trial and stuff like that. It basically just follows, like, she's the main focus, the main character of that one. But it's based off of the same book.
Cool. So there was another movie released in 1971, which was a year before this one, but it was originally called The Other Side of Madness. But after this movie was released, it changed its name or gave itself a secondary title of The Helter Skelter Murders, presumably to kind of like ride on the coattails of this of the popularity of this movie. So
yeah, that in the book, because I read that the book is like the highest selling true crime book ever.
Oh, really?
In history.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
What is the book called? Is
Helter Skelter.
It is called Helter Skelter. Okay. And then the last one I have on my list is from 2009. It's called Manson, My Name is Evil.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. But then I also wanted to talk about upcoming movies because there are actually a lot of upcoming movies. Actually, this summer marks the 50th anniversary of those Tate LaBianca murders.
Wow, I guess I didn't think about that. Wow.
So 1969, this year will be 50 years. And so there are actually a lot of movies coming out this year tackling the subject of Charles Manson, the Manson family. So the first one is called The Haunting of Sharon Tate. And this is the description of this one says, the film takes a look at the last days leading up to Tate's murder from her point of view. The plot is inspired by an actual quote from Tate from an interview published a year before her death, wherein she reveals having dreams about ghosts haunting her house and foreseeing her own death at the hands of a satanic cult.
Interesting.
I haven't seen a release date for this movie yet, but they did release a trailer that had a vague coming soon title on it. So Sharon Tate's sister, Deborah, who's kind of been very vocal about the movies coming out, but she said this film is, quote, classless and tacky, and that she had no knowledge of her sister having any sort of vision or premonition. I originally saw a release date of last year, but I'm wondering if this controversy kind of hurt the release schedule.
Interesting. So definitely maybe riding some coattails of a bigger production that's been known that's coming out.
Are you referring to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yes.
That's the next movie on my list. So this one is actually a fictionalized story following an actor and a stuntman in Hollywood around the time of the Manson murders. And Sharon Tate's sister does approve of this one, maybe because of its more fictionalized nature.
Right, but I heard that Tarantino actually let her...
Yep.
Like, read the script, let her on set, all that stuff.
Yep, met with her personally. Yep. So, like you said, Quentin Tarantino's doing this movie, and it's starring Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. That one has a release date of July 26th of this year, I believe.
We will be seeing it.
Yep. And I thought this was an interesting fact, but apparently the same actor who is cast to play Charles Manson in this movie was also cast to play Charles Manson in Season 2 of Mindhunter on Netflix.
Really?
Yep.
Who's the actor?
Damon Harriman.
Awesome.
Yep. Good for him. I was most excited about this fun fact. The most exciting thing to me was the fact that there's going to be a second season of Mindhunter.
It's about time. It's been a hot minute since they had that.
Mm-hmm. So the next movie on the list is called Charlie Says. It follows the 3 female members of the Manson family who were sentenced to death for their crimes. So that was Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins. And that actually premiered at the Venice Film Festival in early September 2018. And I believe we'll have a U.S.-wide release this year.
Cool.
If I'm not mistaken. And the last one is called Tate. So it focuses on the life of Sharon Tate and will not portray her death. And no release date for Tate has been announced yet.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep. So those are the 4 movies that I know of so far coming out this year about like Sharon Tate and the Manson family.
Well, essentially going to double the repertoire of Manson-esque movies from, what, 76?
Well, the first one came out in 71.
Okay.
This one came out in 76. So that one movie came out in 1971.
Okay, so in the past 48 years?
Yeah, math's not easy, is it?
Yeah, 48 years, there's been 4 movies, and then we're getting 4 this year. Wow, crazy.
Mm-hmm. So that's all I got.
Cool. So, the attorney that disappeared, go ahead and lead off with that. His real name was Ronald Hughes. He went camping with 2 other people. Apparently, they woke up one morning and there had been flash floods the night before.
Okay.
That had they had a Volkswagen. It was the 70s. What a surprise.
Volkswagen Beetle or like a Volkswagen, like one of those van bus things?
Doesn't say. It just said Volkswagen. But it had covered their Volkswagen in mud. And 2 of them decided, all right, we're just going to go ahead and go before things get bad. However, the attorney Hughes decided to stay.
By himself?
Apparently so. So the other 2, the Volkswagen was still there. They didn't leave with the Volkswagen because it was kind of stuck there.
Oh, okay.
So they hitchhiked out.
Okay.
Apparently Hughes was seen by 3 campers on the morning of November 28th. And they later said they briefly talked to him. He seemed fine. He was unharmed. He was in good spirits. Whatever the case. When court reconvened on November 30th, Hughes failed to appear. Due to continued rainstorms, the sheriff wasn't able to do a search right away, so they had to wait 2 days.
Oh.
On December 2nd, Judge Older ordered the trial to proceed and appointed a new attorney, Maxwell Keith, for Van Houten. So anyway, long story short, on March 29th, 1971, 5 months later, almost 6 months later, on the same day that the jury returned death penalty verdicts against all the defendants, Hughes' severely decomposed body was discovered by 2 fishermen in Ventura County. His body was found wedged between 2 boulders in a gorge. Hughes was later positively identified by dental x-rays, but due to the severe decomposition of his body, they were unable to find the nature of his death.
Wow.
So it doesn't know if he was actually killed or if it was floodwaters and he got drowned or whatever the case.
That's crazy.
However, I do find it funny, not funny necessarily, I do find it interesting that I think there was a lot of thought that, the Manson family had something to do with his disappearance.
Okay.
However, the women that were on trial, Atkins, Kreenwinkle, and Van Houten, all blamed Judge Older on making him disappear because apparently this lawyer, Hughes, was known as the hippie lawyer.
Okay.
Because of his being well-versed in hippie culture. He's the one that brought up Linda Kasabian's
LSD?
The LSD usage and the fact that she, thought she was a witch and that she did certain things. He's the one that brought all that stuff up because of his familiarity with the culture.
Okay.
So the 3 women on trial all blamed Judge Older for basically getting rid of him. So it's really kind of funny that the fingers are being pointed in both directions.
Right.
So for my part, because the way this movie was laid out, it was laid out very chronologically and it told us dates and everything. I pulled up a chronological timeline of the Manson trial that I was just going to go down. I want to start with, this actually starts at the birth of Charles Manson, and it won't take long to get to where we were, so I'm just going to kind of go through all of it, if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
So November 12th, 1934, Charles Manson is born in Cincinnati, the illegitimate son of a 16-year-old girl named Kathleen Maddox. His father, who Manson never met, was a Colonel Scott, in quotation, supposedly Colonel Scott, from Ashland, Kentucky. What?
Colonel Squat.
Colonel Scott. In 1939, Manson's mother, a heavy drinker, is sentenced to prison for armed robbery. 8 years later, Manson's mother tries to send Charles to a foster home. A court orders him sent to the Gibbolt School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Oh. I was like, wow, they really sent him away.
I'm drunk. In 1948, the next year, Manson commits his first known crime, the burglary of a grocery store. He is caught and sent to a juvenile detention center. He escapes and commits 2 armed robberies. Apprehended again, Manson is sent to the Indiana School for Boys in Plainfield, where he spends the next 3 years, except for brief periods of freedom during 18 escapes. 3 years later, in 1951, Manson escapes from the school for boys and heads west in a stolen car, burglarizing 15 to 20 gas stations along the way. He is caught in Utah and sent to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. A psychiatrist calls Manson a slick but extremely sensitive boy. A year later, 1952, in his last act of criminal violence before the 1969 murders, Manson sodomizes a boy while holding a razor to his throat. Now we know why he was excited for prison sex. He is transferred
that's what he said in the movie.
to federal reformatory at Petersburg, Virginia. Later in 1952, Manson is moved to a more secure reformatory at Chillicothe, Ohio.
Not sure.
Just saw this morning we have our first listener in Ohio, and then I'm on butcher that. So you're welcome, Ohio. In 1955, Manson marries Rosalie Willis, a waitress from Willing. The couple produces a child, Charles Jr. Manson works as a parking lot attendant and busboy and steals cars. In October, he is arrested for auto theft and sentenced to 5 years probation. Next year, Manson is sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at San Pedro, California, for violating the terms of his 1955 probation. 1958, Manson is divorced. His ex-wife retains custody of their child. Manson is released on parole and becomes a pimp in Southern California. The next year, Manson is arrested for forging a treasury check. He is given a 10-year suspended sentence. The next year, 1960, in January, Manson marries again, this time a 19-year-old. In April, he is indicted on federal Mann Act charges.
Man
with 2 N's.
Oh, okay.
He is arrested in Laredo and brought back to California, where he is ordered to prison to serve the 10-year sentence that had been suspended in 1959. 1961, Manson is transferred to a federal penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. He claims to be a Scientologist. Prison psychiatrists say he has deep-seated personality problems. In 1963, after fathering a second child, Charles Luther Manson, Manson is again divorced. So he's in prison whenever he fathers that child. 1964, Manson becomes obsessed by the music of the Beatles. He learns to play a steel guitar. 1966, Manson aspires to be a songwriter and devotes most of his spare time in prison to the task. On March 21st, 1967, Manson asks prison officials to let him remain in prison. But having completed a 10-year prison term, he is released. He heads for San Francisco. So the next year, Manson and a number of his followers, now called the Family, move into Spahn Ranch in Southern California.
Before we get into that, I just thought it was interesting you're talking about him like learning to play guitar and stuff. One of the movies I didn't put on my list was it was actually a biographical movie about a member of the Beach Boys, but it showed up on the list because Charles Manson actually worked with them on a couple of songs or something like that. Like, didn't he actually like write some song? Like,
yeah.
About what time was that?
I don't know.
In between prison sentences?
No, it's got to be like the late 60s, I think. But
before the Tate murders?
Yeah, at some point, I think I like just a couple of songs. There's also recordings out there of Charles Manson's music that he recorded, I believe, at the same recording studio that the Beach Boys used or something.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
I'm not real familiar with it. I've heard it before.
Okay.
So, December 1968, the Beatles released their White Album, which proves to be a great influence on Manson's thinking. And then here we are to March 23rd, 1969. Manson visits 10,050 Cielo Drive, the Tate residence, looking for Terry Melcher, who he hoped might publish his music.
Oh.
Tate's photographer curtly tells Manson to leave by the back alley, possibly supplying a motive for the later attack at the Tate home. A music teacher named Gary Hinman is stabbed to death on July 31st, 1969. On the wall near the body in Hinman's blood was printed "Political Piggy." August 8th, 1969, Manson tells family members now is the time for Helter Skelter. That evening, he tells Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kasabian to get knives and change of clothes. And he sends them from the ranch on their mission. He tells them to leave a sign, something witchy. Watson drives to the Tate residence. August 9th, 1969, shortly after midnight, the brutal attack on residents of the Tate residence begins. In all, 102 stab wounds are inflicted on 4 victims. A 5th victim is shot. Left dead are actress Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent. The murders are discovered by the housekeeper Winifred Chapman the next morning. The 4 family members return to Spahn Ranch, where Manson criticizes them for doing a messy job. That night, Manson, along with Krenwinkel, Watson, Van Houten, and Kasabian, cruise around looking for potential victims. August 10th, in the early morning hours, family members stabbed to death Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. The words "death to pigs" and "Helter Skelter" are found printed on a wall and a refrigerator door. September 1st, 1969, under a bush near his home, a 10-year-old boy finds the gun used in the Tate murders. The boy's father turns the gun over to the LAPD. The LAPD fails to do a proper investigation. October 12th, 1969, Manson is arrested at Barker Ranch in Death Valley and charged with grand theft auto. He is put in jail in Independence. November 6, 1969, while incarcerated in Los Angeles on other charges, Susan Atkins tells a fellow inmate, Virginia Castro, that she participated in the Tate murders.
In the movie, I think that was Lonnie Howard, her name was, so I think they changed her name.
Okay. So she tells Castro of a death list of celebrities targeted by the family, including Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Tom Jones, Steve McQueen, and Frank Sinatra.
Interesting. Did they specifically target Sharon Tate? Do you know in the real story?
I don't know.
Okay, because what they said in the movie, which I thought was interesting, was that I think it was Atkins' testimony. She said that Tex Watson said they were going to this house because it was Terry Melcher's house and he was familiar with the layout. And so when he was telling them what they were going to do, he was basically like, oh, we're going to rob this house because I'm familiar with the layout.
Interesting.
And it's interesting that you said Terry Melcher because they never really said who that was in the movie. And then you kind of explained that Manson was familiar with Terry Melcher and that Tate now lived in Terry Melcher's house. Interesting. Okay.
So November 12th, 1969, Al Springer, a visitor to the Spahn Ranch, tells LAPD detectives that on August 11th or 12th, Charles Manson had bragged about knocking off 5 pigs the other night. November 17th, 1969, Danny DiCarlo implicates Manson in the Spahn Ranch murder of Shorty Shea and also suggests that persons at the Spahn Ranch might also have been responsible for the Tate murders, but he tells detectives he would be afraid to testify. November 18th, 1969, prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi is assigned to the Tate LaBianca case. July 24th, 1970, the Tate LaBianca murder trial with defendants Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten opens in Los Angeles. As you mentioned, Tex Watson was still in Texas at the time. August 10th, 1970, Judge Older grants Linda Kasabian immunity from prosecution for the Tate LaBianca murders in return for agreeing to appear as the prosecution's star witness at the Manson trial. November 16th, 1970, the state rests its case in the Manson trial. November 19th, 1970, the defense announces, without having presented any evidence, that it also rests. November 20th, 1970, Manson announces that he wishes to testify. He makes a strange statement saying, "The children that come at you with knives are your children. You taught them. I didn't teach them. I just tried to help them stand up." On cross-examination, Bugliosi asks Manson if he thinks he is Jesus Christ, which I'll get to in a few. November 30th, 1970, defense attorney Ronald Hughes fails to show up in court. He is never seen again, leading to speculation he was murdered by the family. January 15th, 1971, Vincent Bugliosi presents the prosecution's closing argument in the Manson trial. January 25th, 1971, the jury convicts all Tate LaBianca defendants on first-degree murder. Concluding the penalty phase of the trial, in March 1971, the jury fixes the penalty as death for all 4 Tate LaBianca defendants. April 19th, 1971, Judge Older sentences Manson to death Manson is ordered to be sent to San Quentin's death row. In October 1971, Charles Tex Watson is convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder. In February 18th, 1972, so less than a year after the penalty phase of the trial, the California Supreme Court declares the death penalty unconstitutional. Manson's sentence is automatically reduced to life in prison. In October that year, Manson is transferred to Folsom Prison. And then that's kind of where we'll stop. Manson gets transferred a lot of different times. At one point, a prisoner claims that God told him to kill Manson and set Manson on fire, which caused a lot of burns to Charles Manson's body. And then in 2017, Charles Manson finally died of natural causes. Mm-hmm. So most of the dates and everything line up.
Yeah.
In my research, it was really kind of hard to do because a lot of the facts and research that are out there are all based on the book by Vincent Bugliosi, which the movie is based on. So it's kind of hard to differentiate where the movie got it wrong if it's all based on the same thing. Right. I do want to go into one last thing. So the testimony of Charles Manson, they show a lot of it in the movie, but I was able to pull up the actual testimony, whenever he testified at the end, and only about half of it was used for the movie. Okay. So all of the stuff that you said was the first half of it, and afterwards, if I can...
I just want to say, because you said, Yossi actually cross-examined him, right?
Right, that's on my... It's all in
okay,
this.
Yeah, that's interesting, because they definitely made it seem like he was just allowed to make a statement, and not that he was, actually a witness or anything, so I'm surprised that they let the prosecution cross-examine him then.
Right, yeah.
Do you know if the jury was present when Charles Manson made a statement and then was then cross-examined by the prosecution?
Nope, it says, Defendant Charles Manson testified on November 20th, 1970, outside of the presence of the jury. Okay. When asked after his testimony whether he would now like to testify before the jury, Manson replied, I have already relieved all of that pressure that I had.
Wow. So it's not even that he just wanted to kind of get it out. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So, like I said, all the stuff you said earlier was kind of the first half of the testimony. At which point, Judge Older asked Manson if he had anything further to say. And sorry if this gets long-winded, I'll make it quick as possible. Manson said, I have killed no one, and I have ordered no one to be killed. I may have implied on several different occasions to several different people that I may have been Jesus Christ, but I haven't decided yet what I am or who I am. Some called him Christ, Manson said. In prison, his name was a number. Some now want a sadistic fiend, and so they see him as that. So be it. Guilty, not guilty, they are only words. You can do anything you want with me, but you cannot touch me because I am only my love. If you put me in the penitentiary, that means nothing because you kicked me out of the last one. I didn't ask to get released. I liked it in there because I like myself. At this point, Judge Older told Manson, you seem to be getting far afield. He told Manson to stick to the issue raised in the trial, to which Manson retorted, the issues? Mr. Bugliosi is a hard-driving prosecutor, polished education, a master of words, semantics. He is a genius. He has got everything that every lawyer would want to have except one thing, a case. Oh. He doesn't have a case. Were I allowed to defend myself, I could have proven this to you. The evidence in this case is a gun. There was a gun that laid around the ranch. It belonged to everybody. Anybody could have picked up that gun and done anything they wanted to with it. I don't deny having that gun. That gun has been in my possession many times. Like the rope was there because you need a rope on a ranch. It is really convenient that Mr. Baggett found those clothes. I imagine he got a little taste of money for that. They put these hideous bodies on photographic display and they imply, if he gets out, see what will happen to you? Helter Skelter means confusion, literally. It doesn't mean any war with anyone. It doesn't mean that some people are going to kill other people. Helter Skelter is confusion. Confusion is coming down around you fast. If you can't see the confusion coming down around you fast, you can call it what you wish. Is it a conspiracy that the music is telling the youth to rise up against the establishment because the establishment is rapidly destroying things? Is that a conspiracy? The music speaks to you every day, but you are too deaf, dumb, and blind to even listen to the music. It is not my conspiracy. It is not my music. I hear what it relates. It says rise. It says kill. Why blame it on me? I didn't write the music. Danny DiCarlo said that I hate black men. And he said that we thought alike. But actually, all I ever did with Danny DiCarlo or any other human being was reflect him back at himself. If he said he did not like the black man, I would say okay. So consequently, he would drink another beer and walk off and say, Charlie thinks like I do. But actually, he does not know how Charlie thinks because Charlie has never projected himself. I don't think like you people. You people put importance on your lives. Well, my life has never been important to anyone. Linda Kasabian gets on the stand and she says when she looked in that man's eyes that was dying, she knew that it was my fault. She knew it was my fault because she couldn't face death. And if she can't face death, that is not my fault. I can face death. I have all the time. In the penitentiary, you live with it. With constant fear of death because it's a violent world in there and you have to be on your toes constantly. I taught the family not to be weak and not to lean on me. I told Paul Watkins to be a man. Boy, you have to stand up and be your own father. So he goes off in the desert and finds a father image in Paul Crockett. I do feel some responsibility. I feel a responsibility for the pollution. I feel a responsibility for the whole thing, to be honest with you. I don't recall ever saying, get a knife and a change of clothes and go do what text says. Or I don't recall saying, get a knife and go kill the sheriff. In fact, it makes me mad when someone kills snakes or dogs or cats or horses. I don't even like to eat meat. That is how much I am against killing. I haven't got any guilt about anything because I have never been able to see any wrong. I have always said, do what your love tells you, and I do what my love tells me. Is it my fault that your children do what you do? What about your children? You say there are just as few. You say there are just a few. There are many, many more coming in the same direction. They are running in the streets and they are coming right at you. So, I mean, I understand why it was left out of the movie.
There were some quotes from that statement that was worked into the statement, like the parts about like the music and like I'm getting the message or whatever. And then I think that last part about the children, yeah. So I think they kind of merged the two, but yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I thought, I mean, I know like he was definitely out of his mind. There's been enough to prove that throughout history, but it was definitely, I thought, really well worded.
Yeah,
and,
actually.
Like, focused in a manner. So anyway, then yes, there was cross-examination by Vincent Bugliosi. Vincent asked, you say you are already dead. Is that right, Charlie? Charlie said, dead in your mind or dead in my mind? Vincent said, define it any way you want to. Charlie said, as any child will tell you, dead is when you are no more. It is just when you are not there. If you weren't there, you would be dead. Vincent asked, how long have you been dead? To be precise about it, you think you have been dead for close to 2,000 years, don't you? So I guess he was making a reference to him being Jesus Christ there.
Right.
To which Manson said, Mr. Bugliosi, 2,000 years is relative to the second we live in. Mr. Bugliosi said, suffice it to say, Department 104 is a long way from Calvary. Isn't that true? The jury in this case never heard a single solitary word you said. Mr. Manson, are you willing to testify in front of the jury and tell them the same things that you have testified here in open court today? Kanarek, his attorney, objected, and Judge Older sustained the objection. Older asked Manson if he now wished to testify before the jury. He replied, I've already relieved all the pressure I had. Manson left the stands, and as he walked by the counsel table, he told his three co-defendants, you don't have to testify now.
Well.
So that's... I mean, it wasn't like a lot of cross-examination. It didn't really like prove anything. I think he just wanted to kind of like make a stab at like, do you feel like were dead and then resurrected? And
gotcha.
But yeah, that's kind of all I have. The movie was pretty accurate. Like I said, it was based on the book written by the guy who prosecuted. So
right, and
you know,
he was there through all of it.
Right, and it may be skewed in that direction. But I mean, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, they're not writing any books that are going to be any less skewed. Right. You know. So, anyway, that's all I got.
Yeah. I'd say it sounds like the movie's pretty accurate.
I do too. I mean...
At least regarding the trial and everything that happened, everything that came from it, so...
Right.
Yeah. Good deal.
Yeah.
Glad we finally watched it. It was definitely interesting. I didn't know a lot about the story of Charles Manson and the Manson family and why it was called Helter Skelter or anything, so I definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. And, you know, this little small timeline I found here, you know, making that one little piece together with the music guy.
The Hinman, yeah. Yeah, that kind of brought it all together. That was really cool.
The Terry whatever guy.
Yeah, Terry Melcher.
Yeah.
Well, and then, yeah, so you said he went to Terry Melcher because he thought that Melcher
would help him record or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the fact that Gary Hinman was a music teacher who was killed. So maybe he was like kind of taking some of that frustration out.
Right, yeah.
On that.
Yeah, it definitely tied a few things together that the movie didn't help with. So, yeah, I mean, you know, as much as the movie told us a lot of the story, it seems like there's also a lot more to it. So,
definitely.
So.
Yeah, the movie just kind of opened up with the murders at the Tate house, and then that was like the major focus of it. So,
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think this one's definitely full of fact, not full of crap.
I would agree.
Cool. So what do we have next week?
Next week we have Citizen X. That is going to be our main movie. And, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, it's about Andrei. I'm going to go with Chikatilo. It's a Russian name. I will look up pronunciation by the time we do the episode. So if that was wrong, I will hopefully have it right next week. Katie will be doing the movie portion, which we'll actually be talking about one main movie and then 2 other movies that are based on the same person. And I'll be covering the true story because I'm roughly familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I have no clue what this is about, so I am in for a surprise.
Yes, you are. So that's what will be coming at you next week. So like always, find us on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play,
Spotify,
and YouTube. Mm-hmm. Reach out to us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at Drink to Fact. Mm-hmm. And we like getting your emails, so send us an email, drinktofact@gmail.com. We released a new episode this week. It's a new segment we're calling What to Watch. It kind of gives you the true story of upcoming true story movies. That'll be part 1, and then we'll do a part 2 after the movie is released in theaters. We'll go see it and give you our opinion of the movie and the fact, you know, the comparison and everything. So send us an email. Let us know what you think of it. Like I said, we released our first part 1 this week, and we'll be releasing the part 2 of that in about a week. So
yeah, and if you can think of any new movies, if you see anything that's coming out that you think might relate, you know, we do true crime, serial killer, paranormal stories that are turned into movies. So let us know what you want to see on that too.
Yeah. Well, like always,
please rate, review, and subscribe.
And we'll see you later.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.